Well, hi, everybody. I'm going over chapters, Ayala's Angel, chapters 14 to 26. Near the end of chapter 13, Ayala bursts into tears. Quote, "Then she got up and ran out of the room in order that she might weep over her troubles in the privacy of her own chamber." End quote. She compares herself to Beauty and Tom to the Beast. She thinks, quote, "Cinderella did not ask to have the prince for her husband," end quote. Ayala at 19 has grown up in a fairy tale world. When her Uncle Tom Tringle asks her, "Do you love some other man?" she is less than truthful when she says, "No, no, no." She is in love with another man, a fantasy man, her angel of light, and she is determined to remain faithful to this airy fairy hero. We never really learn much about what he is, but Ayala is very clear what he is not. Both of her suitors, her cousin Tom Tringle and Colonel Jonathan Stubbs, are compared to the Beast. I love this illustration by Walter Crane, and let's just see if I can pull it up here for you. There it is, I hope. In chapters 13 and 15, first Ayala's Aunt Emmeline, then her Uncle Thomas make in-person attempts to persuade or bully her into marrying Tom. And that is how she pictures him. Ayala understands that financially and socially, she is in an inferior position. Several times, she and her sister refer to themselves as property. She is very aware of her limited choices as a penniless but beautiful young woman. She can be dependent on her relatives for room and board, or be dependent on a man whom she will have to promise to obey. It is likely that Ayala has very little understanding of the sexual side of marriage, and likely she doesn't interact with her angel that way, even in her dreams. Her cousin Tom, corpulent, flamboyant, intrusive to the point of stalking, is all too physically real. She shudders when she thinks of touching him, but she cannot put this into words, even to her friend Nina. She simply repeats that, quote, "He is a lout and a beast." A Cinderella must have a fairy godmother, and she appears, carriage and all, in the form of Marchesa Baldoni. Ayala is taken to the ball, where, instead of a prince, she meets another beast. But what an interesting beast. Mr. Jonathan Stubbs, the youngest colonel in the British Army, with short red hair, a bristly red beard, and a large mouth. Ayala dances the night away with him and is much entertained. He was, as it were, quote, "the genius of comedy, without a touch of which life would be very dull." But the angel of light must have something tragic in his composition, must verge at any rate on tragedy. Ayala did not know that beautiful description of a sallow, sublime sort of Werther-faced man. But I fear that in creating her angel of light, she drew a picture in her imagination of a man of that kind. End of quote. Contemporary readers would likely have recognized, possibly even been able to quote the complete passage from the poem referenced here. Quote, "A fine, sallow, sublime, sort of Werther-faced man with mustachios that gave what we read of so oft, the dear corsair expression, half savage, half soft, as hyenas in love may be fancied to look." End of quote. Hardly a beautiful description. It's from a poem by the Irish poet Thomas Moore, which satirizes the trope of the romantic hero. More was very good friends with Lord Byron, and Byron took exception to this passage as a criticism of Byron's Corsair and other romantic heroes. Trollope's reference here tells us that Ayala's Angel of Light is a somewhat ethereal version of the Byronic hero so pervasive in popular culture at the time. On the last day of her stay with her fairy godmother, Ayala sees both of her suitors. Comparing them, she decides, quote, that neither the one nor the other was to be spoken of in the same breath or thought of in the same spirit as the angel of light, end quote. But at least Colonel Jonathan is not a lout, and she likes him. Our Cinderella has two ugly stepsisters, well, cousins, and their affairs provide some very entertaining subplots. The oldest, and perhaps the ugliest, Augusta, is recently married to the Honorable Septimus Traffic, MP, a man most annoying to her father and most entertaining to us. To get him to marry Augusta, Sir Thomas had to provide a wedding present of £110,000. In today's money, that's 17 million pounds. Sir Thomas is very rich indeed. The younger sister Gertrude has a suitor of her own, one Frank Houston. He tells himself, quote, Gertrude hadn't any turn of a neck to speak of. Gertrude was a stout, healthy girl, and having 120,000 pounds, was entitled to such a husband as himself. He tells her father, I regard her as all that is perfect in a woman, end quote. Her father flatly turns Frank down, but Gertrude and her mother manage to persuade Sir Thomas to allow the impecunious Mr. Houston to join them at Glenbogie, their estate in Scotland, to help slaughter grouse. Ayala's own sister Lucy grew up in the same fairy tale world as Ayala, but is much less bubbly and more grounded in reality. She has connected with a young man she met when her parents were alive, one Isidore Hamel. Besides being somewhat poor, but not completely impecunious, Mr. Hamel, quote, had no mother to speak of, and he had little brothers and sisters who also had no mother to speak of. Mr. Hamel, the father, entertained friends on Sunday with the express object of playing cards, end of quote. Isidore will receive no invitation to help slaughter grouse. For the next few scenes, we travel to Loch Ness, where, quote, on the southeastern side, Sir Thomas Tringle possessed a beautiful mansion. On the other side, on the edge of a ravine, down which rushed a little stream called the Collar, was an inconvenient, rickety cottage, an inconvenient, rickety cottage called Drumcollar. And you might perhaps travel through all Scotland without finding a more beautifully romantic spot in which to reside. End of quote. First to the mansion. When Frank's week with his family is almost over, quote, he contrived to find Sir Thomas in the solitude of his own room and began to act the part of Allan a Dale, end quote. Another fairy tale reference. As told in the English and Scottish popular ballads, Robin Hood meets a sad young man. And every step he fetched a sigh, alack and well a day. I have no money, the young man said, but 5 shillings and a ring. And that I have kept this 7 long years to have at my wedding. Yesterday I should have married a maid, but now she is from me ta'en, and chosen to be an old knight's delight, whereby my poor heart is slain. End of quote. Somewhat ironical as Frank's story is almost a reversal of Alan Adale's. Yes, he is very poor, and his request to marry Gertrude is rejected on that account. But he rushes from this rejection straight to the arms of his true love, his beauteous cousin, Imogene Dossamer. Across the lake, we learn that the delightful Drumcollar Cottage is the preferred residence of none other than Colonel Jonathan Stubbs, and his companion at the present moment was Isidore Hamel. Apparently, Isidore and Jonathan are old friends, but it is just possible Isidore has chosen this time for a visit more than for male companionship. He uses Drumcollar as a base camp from which to launch an assault on the mansion across the lake. After taking a boat and scrambling up the side of a ravine, he encounters Sir Thomas, mounted on his cob. Almost as if by magic, Sir Thomas invites Isidore to lunch, and as they are returning together to the mansion, gives him permission to walk and talk with Lucy. Very quickly, Lucy and Isidore pledge their love. Then it's time for lunch, which is eaten in grim silence until the women leave the room. Then the Honorable Septimus Traffic interrogates Isidore about Colonel Stubbs' lifestyle. Quote, he catches a few trout sometimes in the tarns above, but I fancy that Stubbs isn't much devoted to shooting and fishing. And what the devil does he do with himself in such a country as this? Hamel shrugged his shoulders, not caring to say that what with walking, what with reading and writing, his friend could be as happy as the day was long in such a place as Drumcollar. Is he a liberal? A what? Asked Hamel. Oh, a liberal. Upon my word, I don't know what he is. He is chiefly given to poetry, tobacco, and military matters. Then the Honorable Septimus turned up his nose in disgust. Back at Drumcollar, Jonathan Stubbs has this to say about Septimus Traffic. Quote, words cannot penetrate that skin of his. Satire flows off him like water from a duck. Ridicule does not touch him. The fellest abuse does not succeed in inflicting the slightest wound. He has learnt the great secret that a man cannot be cut who will not be cut. End of quote. During his stay at his charmingly rustic retreat, Colonel Stubbs has been giving much thought to the institution of marriage, and not just that of his friend. Quote, Hamel had told his friend with great triumph of his engagement with Lucy Dormer, but the friend, Colonel Stubbs, did not return the confidence by informing the sculptor that during the whole of his conversation and for many days previous to it, his mind had been concerned with the image of Lucy's sister. End quote. How is he to see Ayala again? The venue he and his friends choose is Stalham in November. Quote, Stalham was a handsome country seat in the county of Rufford, and Sir Harry Albury had lately taken upon himself the duties of master of the Rufford and Ufford United Pack. End of quote. So we must mount up and get ready for the galloping prose of a couple of hunting chapters. But first, Ayala must be gotten out of her cage. Since her Aunt Dosset had been so stern and hard, Stubbs and company decide to attack from another direction. Quote, it was at last decided that the mission should be made by Lady Albury herself, and not to Mrs. Dosset at Kingsbury Crescent, but to Mr. Dosset in his office in the Somerset House. The grand Lady Albury completely overpowers poor Mr. Dosset with the argument that Ayala must display herself in places where there are young men if she is to succeed in selling her only asset, her beauty. Reluctantly, Mr. Dosset persuades an even more reluctant Mrs. Dosset to allow Ayala to go to Stalin in November. So Ayala's indignation changed to Ayala's gratitude, and she joined her friend Nina for a week in the country, hunting and flirting. In Rufford County, we find a cast of characters new to some of you, but not to those of us who remember the American Senator. It was in that novel, set some 7 years before this one, that we first met Tony Tuppett Huntsman and Larry Twentyman, a good-looking, better sort of farmer. In The American Senator, we learned that, quote, he not only rode well to the hounds, but paid £25 annually to the hunt. He generally owned a racing colt or two and attended meetings. He was a handsome, good-looking man of about 30 and would have been a happy man had he not been too ambitious in his aspirations after gentry. End quote. Now he is approaching 40, married and a father, and it seems a bit more relaxed about his social climbing. All of which is a gratifying sequel to his misadventures in The American Senator. That's a bit of a spoiler, but that's a problem you have to deal with if you read Trollope novels out of chronological order. Stalham is only 9 miles from Rufford, the estate of, quote, Lord Rufford, who a few years since was known as one of the hardest riders in these parts, end quote. I think this may be a sly innuendo about Lord Rufford's adventure with women 7 years previous in The American Senator. But now he has half a dozen babies, and Ayala sees him as a very comfortable old gentleman. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this little sequel to Lord Rufford's story after he has degenerated into matrimony. Mounted on their ponies, Ayala and Nina are guided through a truly marvelous experience of the hunt. Quote, Larry Twentyman, of whom they had never heard before, was now the god of their idolatry, end quote. He is almost a wizard as he leads these 2 novice riders after the fox. With his knowledge of the landscape, he guides them on paths that were safe for them. Quote, but it seemed to the girls that they had galloped over monstrous hedges and leapt over walls. The brook, however, the river as it seemed to them, had been the crowning glory. Even the angel of light was hardly more heavenly than the brook, end of quote. While Larry Twentyman is providing refreshments to all the riders, the girls are invited into the inner sanctum to meet his wife and baby. Perhaps this charming little scene was added to give us readers a bit more of a sequel to the lives of the characters from The American Senator. Meanwhile, Colonel Stubbs has had a misadventure. In doing his best to maintain the pace set by Larry Twentyman and the girls, his horse balked the brook and jumped into it. Despite the humiliation of having to dismount in the brook and filling his boots with water, Colonel Stubbs did enjoy his day. Quote, it had been his delight to see the 2 girls ride, unquote. And as he lifts Ayala from her horse, that's a somewhat intimate maneuver if you've ever had anybody lift you off a horse. He calls her by his Christian name. He calls her by her Christian name. The narrator then comments on the colonel's philosophy of not taking competition too seriously. Quote, always to excel and go ahead of everybody should, the present writer thinks, be in the heart of every man who rides to the hounds. There was in our colonel a philosophical way of looking into the thing, which perhaps became him as a man, but was deleterious to his character as a sportsman, end quote. Is this what Mr. Trollope truly believes, do you think? I suggest that the intrusive narrator is being satirized here, that the narrator is perhaps another fictional character. Ayala's allotted time at Stalham is almost up, and she is determined to be grateful and satisfied with all the adventures she has had. But unbeknownst to her, the colonel arranges to have her stay extended by 4 more days. Her joy at this is compared to that of the Peri gaining access to paradise. This is likely alluding to a prose poetry story called Lalla Rookh, also by Thomas Moore. In Persian mythology, the Peris, beautiful female fairy-like creatures, are all denied access to paradise because of, apparently, the sin of their birth. I didn't sort that one out completely. In Moore's version of the tale, after several false attempts, the Peri finds the right charm to get her through the gates of paradise. She's pretty pleased about that. Quote, "Joy, joy, forever my task is done. The gates are passed and heaven is won. Oh, am I not happy? I am, I am." End quote. But no sooner does the Peri of our story, Ayala, pass into the paradise of 4 more days with the pony Sprite. Sprite had nearly realized her idea of the angel of light. Then Jonathan Stubbs ruins everything by proposing that she marry him. He tells her that if you would not be my wife, I should never have a wife, never should have a baby, never should have a home of my own. End quote. He then lectures her on the dangers of too much romance. We learned his opinion on romance back in chapter 18, where he sings, "I can bake and I can brew, I can make an Irish stew, wash a shirt and iron it too." That's the sort of girl I mean to go in for if I ever marry. And when you've got 6 children and a small income, it's apt to turn out better than grace and poetry. "A little of both, perhaps," said Hamel. "Well, yes, I don't mind a little Byron now and again, so there's no nonsense." End quote. The little ditty that Jonathan quotes is from a traditional ballad about a young woman applying for a servant's job. And that story ends badly. Even though he winds up his arguments by saying, "I must strive to soar until I can approach your dreams," Ayala tells herself, it was not to such as he that the something grander, which was to be the peculiar attribute of the angel of light, could be accorded. End quote. Lady Albury also has something to say about the dangers of romance. Quote, "Romance can never make you happy. When a man is a hero, he shouldn't be broken-hearted for want of a woman's smiles, should he?" Ayala says, "She ought not to smile unless she loves him," as she left the room. Ayala was named after Mr. Trollope's favorite champagne. And let's see if I can do this properly this time. Okay. Here's the champagne. Hopefully that turned up. Oh dear. Okay, but fairy tales, oh, okay, light and bubbly, but surprisingly intoxicating. She is in many ways a fairy tale princess, but fairy tales often have their dark side. As Chris Skilton pointed out in our first session with this novel, there are, quote, dark events with a light tone. Ayala is quick-witted and trusting. She has no guile. And of course, she is very beautiful. The very qualities that attract the men also make her very vulnerable. Her poverty alone pressures her into marriage, How long can she hold on to her angel of light? Couple of questions here. How important in this novel is the trope of the Byronic hero, do you think? Could this novel be considered to be anti-Byronic? And another question, in Terry's presentation for our last session, she pointed out that Trollope wrote much of this novel while staying in the Black Forest. What parts of this novel so far are fairy tale-like? Thank you.